ABC News, this is Turning Point with Barbara Walters, Diane Sawyer, Forrest Sawyer, and tonight, Peter Jennings.
It was all over in one stunned, horrifying second. Astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee, the prime crew of Apollo 1, never had a chance.
There was a final get us out and a scream, and that was it.
3 brave astronauts. They gave their lives in a space race with the Soviets.
We had the Russians who were headed to the moon, and we were not going to let them get there first.
Winning was everything.
I felt like we were defending freedom.
It was a rush to glory.
They were pushed, trying to make this goal of going to the moon and back.
And then a terrible mistake.
We opened that door, and you could see the badly charred interior.
What happened here in 1967 is not forgotten.
It was an accident that shouldn't have happened.
The tragedy that could have crippled the space program.
It came as such a shock. Nobody imagined that such a thing could happen.
And how it led to America's greatest space triumph.
Turning Point. Tonight, Race to the Moon, the tragedy of Apollo 1.
30 years ago, this launch pad at Cape Canaveral in Florida was at the center of a feverish effort to beat the Soviet Union to the moon. And tonight, even as we think about the possibility of going on to Mars, maybe, we're going to take you back to one of the most dramatic moments in American space history. Good evening. I'm Peter Jennings. In so many ways, the space race was symbolic of the Cold War. On that particular night in 1967, the 3 astronauts who'd been chosen to fly in the first Apollo mission, which would finally lead America onto the moon, were sealed inside their space capsule here, testing the system. Throughout the country, there was the most enormous anticipation that perhaps finally America would beat the Soviets at something in space.
The Soviets had pushed our face in the mud, as it were. The Congress were up in arms, and why weren't we working faster and more aggressively?
The Apollo program, in its purest form, was a battle in the Cold War.
We had 3 years, 67, 68, 69, to get to the moon. We were pushing.
A lot of us were suffering from go fever. Let's get on with it.
If indeed something went wrong, you were going to pay with your life.
The United States had been under enormous pressure for 10 years, ever since the Soviets got into space first with something called Sputnik in 1957. Americans could not believe that the Soviet Union, which could not even build a reliable washing machine, could have done something like this. Put the world's first man-made object into orbit. And everyone knew that if the Soviets had a rocket powerful enough to put a satellite in space, they had one big enough to put a warhead on Washington. Then in 1961, the Soviets used one of their giant rockets to put a human being in space, the cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin.
This May Day celebration in Moscow gives the Russians the opportunity to crow loud and long over the West. For the theme running through the parade is Triumph in Space.
I do not regard the first man in space as a sign of the weakening of the free world.
April 1961. John Kennedy had been president for only 3 months. While minimizing the Soviet achievement in public, the new president sent a memo to Vice President Lyndon Johnson asking if there wasn't some way to counter the Soviet victories in space. Do we have a chance of beating the Soviets by putting a laboratory in space, the new president asked, or by a trip around the moon, or by a rocket to land on the moon, or by a rocket to go to the moon and back with a man? Is there any program, Kennedy wanted to know, which America could win in space? By then, the United States had put its first man in space, the astronaut Alan Shepard. It was a 16-minute flight that could not compare to the Soviets' manned orbit of the Earth. But 1 month later, President Kennedy surprised the world by announcing the U.S. would try something that would surely beat the Soviets.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
The program to get to the moon would be called Apollo, after the Greek god of poetry and prophecy. Apollo would be designed to overtake the Russians. So did those of you in the Apollo program really feel like warriors or astronauts?
Well, I felt like a cold warrior.
Frank Borman would become one of America's most famous astronauts.
I think one of the great byproducts of this thing was the understanding of the moon and of course, the exploration aspect of it. But I felt like we were defending freedom.
In 1963, 2.5 years after President Kennedy spoke to Congress, he went to see firsthand how the war was going at the launch complex at Cape Canaveral in Florida. From here, men were to go to the moon. That was November the 16th, 1963. In less than a week, the president would be assassinated in Dallas. After the death of President Kennedy, his goal of putting an American on the moon took on even more significance for the country.
We must assure our preeminence in the peaceful exploration of outer space, focusing on an expedition to the moon in this decade.
By 1967, everyone could feel the deadline and the Russians coming on.
We had less than 3 years left, and we hadn't even got an Apollo spacecraft off the pad. We had the Russians, who were headed to the moon, and we knew it, and by golly, we were not going to let them get there first.
This was the Apollo vehicle designed to win the race. Engineers had taken the lunar spacecraft off the drawing boards and on to the launch pad in only 5 years. It was put on top of its booster rocket and was being made ready to fly by February of 1967.
The Apollo spacecraft was the most complicated machine that man had ever invented, used, or worked with. Today, it pales by comparison. The shuttle would make it look like a Model T. But at that stage, it was very, very complicated.
The spacecraft was said to have more than 2 million parts, and each one of them had to be working perfectly for the February launch. The crew was the best. It was a prize NASA assignment to be chosen as the first crew to fly Apollo. In mid-January of 1967, the crew was bussed out to Pad 34 for the last scheduled photo opportunity before the mission. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Virgil Grissom, known as Gus. 40 years old, Gus was the mission commander. He was the old hand, one of the original 7 astronauts picked in 1959. He knew the dangers of spaceflight.
There is some risk, but we just try to take as much out as we can during the pre-testing to make sure the systems are good. We recognize that there are unknowns and things can happen that we haven't planned for.
During the recovery phase of his very first space flight, Gus Grissom was almost lost when the explosive bolts holding the hatch on his capsule accidentally fired. The hatch blew off, the spacecraft filled with water and sank. Grissom was pulled to safety. Engineers redesigned the spacecraft hatches, but that redesign would be a fatal factor in Gus Grissom's future.
Gus lived under the shadow of losing his Mercury spacecraft. I think as a result of that, he had something to prove. Flying the first Apollo was something that was very, very important to Gus.
Grissom's second in command was 36-year-old Ed White, also a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. He was the son of an Air Force general. Although the Soviets had walked in space first, Ed White was the first American to do so.
You're right, son, Ed. You look beautiful. I'd be like $1 million. I'm going to pick up.
In 1965, Ed White had floated outside his spacecraft more than 100 miles above the Pacific Ocean. He became an instant celebrity in a nation still excited by space.
Congratulations, Eddie.
Come on in later on.
Like Grissom, Ed White knew the dangers of space flight.
People might look at our work as being perhaps dangerous or risky of sorts, but I think we train in it and work in it so much and understand it well enough that we don't look at it from this viewpoint.
Well, Ed White was the original All-American boy. He was an outstanding athlete. He had tried out for the Olympics. He was very gung-ho, straight arrow.
And the third member of the Apollo 1 crew, Navy Lieutenant Commander Roger Chaffee. 31, he was the rookie. A Navy pilot, he was yet to make his first space flight. Like any rookie, he was excited.
I want to go as far as NASA goes during my useful time as a pilot to them. I'd like to go on a moon flight, and if we go to Mars, I'd like to go on that.
Before anyone got to the moon or to Mars, Apollo 1 had to get into Earth orbit to test lunar equipment and procedure, and things were not going smoothly.
Gus particularly would come to me saying, you know, a lot of things wrong with this spacecraft. It's not as good as the ones which we flew earlier.
By now, Alan Shepard had become the chief of the astronaut office.
Said this is something different about this thing, and we would say, of course it's different, Gus. It's a brand new spacecraft. But it's your responsibility to tell us and the engineers what you find specifically wrong.
Was Grissom more unhappy with the situation than White or Chaffee?
No, but Grissom was the commander, and as such, he was a spokesman. So I think that Grissom was reflecting the attitudes of the entire crew. They were frustrated with the spacecraft.
And their frustration, I guess, wasn't enough or wasn't something to slow down the process so everything could have been tested out.
Martha Chaffee had married Roger when she was 19 years old. They had been college sweethearts.
I regret the fact that in this so-called race to the moon, they may have overlooked safety at times.
Everyone who got in that spacecraft got in there voluntarily. If Gus said, I don't want to fly this thing, there'd been someone in line to get in his seat, like that quick.
No one was about to get Gus Grissom's seat, and 2 months before his scheduled flight, he assured everyone that most of the problems on Apollo 1 had been fixed.
The spacecraft systems all look pretty good to us now. They've been through a checkout at North American and have gone through initial series down at the Cape, and as soon as we get it out of the altitude chamber, I think that a good portion of our problems are over.
The crew knew the spacecraft better than any other single individual. They had lived with that spacecraft from its inception almost through all of the system testings at the Cape. I don't think the crew or any of us had any idea that the potential for disaster was there.
On January 27, 1967, the crew went to Pad 34 to take the spacecraft through a simulated flight. Its rocket booster was not even fueled. As the crew rode the elevator up to the Apollo capsule more than 200 feet above the ground, they may have thought the problems with the spacecraft had been taken care of. But the most dangerous part of the simulation had nothing to do with the hardware. It was about something so simple, something we all live with every day: oxygen. The 3 Apollo astronauts were sealed into their spacecraft, and the technicians began pressurizing it with 100% oxygen. One of the things that's surprising is the fact that nobody considered an alternative to pure oxygen in terms of the environment. How come?
Our spacecraft had to be built to support 100% pure oxygen, primarily because we had to build it lighter.
The Russians never used pure oxygen. With their bigger booster rockets, they could use a heavier 2-gas system of nitrogen and oxygen, much like the air we breathe. Did you think nothing of the fact that the Russians were using a combination?
Well, the
nitrogen and oxygen?
The Russians had a great advantage. They had rockets that could lift almost anything. Our systems were geared toward a rocket that had a limited payload. And as an engineer, that 100% oxygen made a lot of sense.
You can burn anything in pure oxygen, almost anything. And yet, I accepted that blindly.
Wally Schirra and Gus Grissom were old friends, next-door neighbors. Schirra was commander of the Apollo 1 backup crew. If anything happened to Grissom, it would be Schirra sitting in the Apollo 1 capsule that day.
I never really appreciated this pure oxygen environment as being that dangerous. And I can recall in high school, probably in grade school, a test tube and taking a glowing piece of steel wool and sticking it in, it burned. And wow, you can burn steel.
America had been through 16 manned space flights using pure oxygen, and there had never been a problem. To keep the weight down, Apollo 1 would use the same system. Here at Pad 34 that day, it seemed perfectly normal for 3 men to be working inside a capsule of pressurized 100% oxygen. Under pressure, the oxygen turned the spacecraft into a potential bomb. All it was missing was a fuse.
Race to the Moon, the tragedy of Apollo 1. Tonight's Turning Point will continue in a moment.
Over the last 150 years, all kinds of companies that said they'd be there when you needed them didn't stand up to their promises. That's life. Our policy of thoughtful, prudent investing has kept us, well, a pillar of strength for the last 150 years. That's New York Life, the company you keep.
When you set out to hatch something that's brand new, you gotta have all your ducks in a row. Oh, you've probably got a pretty good idea of how you think a luxury car handles, but you haven't set foot in this one yet. When you push, it performs, and when you lead, it follows. It's fast, it's fun, it's fiendishly flexible. Catera. It's a whole new ride from the luxury leader. It's the Caddy that zigs.
And me and my brothers love garlic. It's a beautiful thing. We're all real big on these new Garlic Lovers pasta sauces from Healthy Choice. We're talking real aroma here. Big-time garlic flavor. Good. Zero fat. Hey, it's Healthy Choice for garlic lovers.
This is no ordinary toothbrush. This is the Braun Oral-B Ultra. Clinically proven to remove plaque better than an ordinary toothbrush. Dentists say change your toothbrush every 3 months. We say change it forever. The new Braun Oral-B Ultra.
Ted Danson unlocks an ancient mystery, and Lois and Clark encounter a comic with a frightening act. Hi, I'm Brooke Alexander. Welcome to the ABC Screening Room. Saturday night, when Ted Danson uncovers a startling secret, he'll make believers out of us all in the ABC Saturday night movie, Loch Ness. Then on Sunday, a super couple get a super surprise from Drew Carey and Mimi on Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman. That's a sneak peek from the ABC Screening Room.
It's the controversial episode you can't miss. Detective Simone's love life gone.
I'm not drinking with them, and I'm not sleeping with them.
His judgment gone. What's happening to Bobby? NYPD Blue, ABC Tuesday.
I'm done playing with you.
Your discretion advised.
Turning Point, Race to the Moon, the tragedy of Apollo 1 continues. Once again, Peter Jennings.
It is now January 27th, 1967, and the crew is putting the spaceship through its final dress rehearsal. The launch of Apollo 1 is now only a month away. By 6:30 in the evening, the crew has been inside the capsule for 5.5 hours. A capsule which is pressurized with pure oxygen.
The day before, Wally Schirra and his backup crew had taken the Apollo 1 capsule through a similar test, but using natural air with the hatch open.
When I finished that test, I found a few electronic glitches, we call them, anomalies, and said, Gus, I don't like those. I would propose, if you have any glitches at all, now being in your spacesuit in a pure oxygen environment, that you cancel the test.
Grissom does not take his friend's advice.
A lot of us were suffering, and I think Gus was, from go fever. Let's get on with it. The term go fever is just that. They pushed themselves, or they were pushed trying to make this goal of going to the moon and back.
Apollo 1 here. I got flight. How do I get the moon? We can't talk between 3 buildings.
There were problems all afternoon on that January day at Pad 34. The biggest one seemed to be the communications between Apollo 1 and technicians in the blockhouse. In the middle of all this go fever, something was about to go terribly wrong.
There was a T-minus 10-minute hold, and we'd been messing around all day with extending the test. And so I wasn't really paying a whole lot of attention.
We're in a blockhouse away from the pad, cannot see the spacecraft directly, but through television cameras can see it. I was looking in the door of the Apollo spacecraft and saw a white flash.
I heard the first cry from the cabin, and it sounded like fire. And I turned around to the chap next to me who was on the console, and I said, "Did he say fire?"
I was on the 8th level, and I heard one of the crew members say, "Hey, it's fire in here." I heard the pressure vessel relief valve over on the side of the command module let go, and we knew what was happening.
In these tests filmed after the fire, engineers would try to reconstruct the sequence of events. They built a mock spacecraft, duplicated the interior of Apollo 1, filled it with oxygen, and then gave it a spark.
From the first report of the fire to the time when the command module ruptured was, you know, it seemed like it was interminable at the time, but it was only, I think, 15 seconds.
Then the fire came out the sides where the panels were off, and a sheet of flame went out to my left.
And right on top of that came the next transmission, which was something to the effect like, "Get us out, we're burning up, we've got a fire in the cockpit."
The accident Gus Grissom had on his Mercury flight came back to haunt the Apollo 1 crew. To make sure a hatch never accidentally opened, they had been redesigned to open inwardly with no emergency explosive bolts to blow it away.
If the pressure increases inside the spacecraft as compared to no pressure outside, the hatch will seal tighter and tighter. That was the calamity, of course, that developed when the fire started. There was no way you could open that hatch again until that pressure was relieved within the spacecraft.
And I didn't see anything else because I had turned then. My outdoor had been burned, my clothes, and changed my hair, my eyebrows.
And then there was I think a final "Get us out" and a scream, and that was it.
We opened that door, and you could see the badly charred interior that you knew you had lost your crew, and the 3 guys that were our personal friends. All happened within minutes, and that was it.
This is Peter Jennings at ABC News in New York. As you have already heard this evening, the 3 astronauts for America's first manned Apollo spaceflight have been killed. The astronauts died in a launch pad fire at Cape Kennedy.
4 days after the fire, January 31st, 1967, the nation went through the agony of burying the flight crew. Ed White was buried at West Point, Gus Grissom and Roger Chaffee in Arlington National Cemetery.
We were used to the fact that the men were not there. In the astronaut program, if they weren't working on one of the flights, they were making speeches, so they weren't there. And this, you know, took me a long time to realize that he really was not coming back.
You can't believe the impact that this fire and these deaths had on the Cape. We had waves of people drinking too much, and the doctors were giving people's uppers and downers, and we had a lot of breakdowns.
It was brutal because everybody was working so closely.
Dr. Robert Siemens was NASA's deputy administrator.
And it came as such a shock. Nobody imagined that such a thing could happen.
The spacecraft that would never fly was taken away to be disassembled, inspected, and analyzed inch by inch.
This thing that had been a pulsating, blinking lights, almost live machine with a soul was now just a corpse. It was a sobering thing.
As the nation contemplated the loss of the astronauts, many critics argued that America should drop the Apollo program altogether.
I think that Apollo 1 was really the turning point in the Apollo program. All of a sudden people realized that it was not all glamour and success, that there was indeed a great deal of risk involved in this thing.
And it could have been a showstopper, because there were a lot of people out there who said, you know, we knew you couldn't do it, we knew it wouldn't work. Going to the moon is someone's dream.
There's battle lines being drawn, and nobody's right if everybody's wrong.
And in the 1960s, Americans had too many other problems to worry about the moon. Thousands of Americans were dying in Vietnam, while racial conflict was raging in American cities. College campuses were exploding with students demonstrating against not only the war in Vietnam, but the American system itself.
For the field day, for the heat, 1,000 people in the street, singing songs and carrying signs.
When viewed against this background of problems, many Americans thought it was not worth the estimated $20 billion it was going to take to put a man on the moon.
There was a great deal of uncertainty because, as with every other disaster in this country, a democracy sort of puts the pendulum way back on the other side, and we weren't certain how that would be handled.
For one thing, to get the manned space program back on track, NASA first had to find out what had gone wrong with Apollo 1. NASA put together a committee of experts to investigate the fire. Frank Borman was the astronaut picked to be a member.
I was the first member of the accident investigation team to get in and to start going, chronicling where the switches were and all of the other data that we needed to find out.
And as you looked in that first time, did you have one strong impression?
Unbelievable. I just couldn't believe that short duration of fire could provided so much damage. It was incredible.
Despite the fire that had raged through the capsule, autopsies showed that the 3 astronauts had not burned to death. They had been asphyxiated when their air hoses burned through, and they inhaled the toxic gases that had built up during the fire. NASA wanted to get the hearings and investigation over with quickly because a long inquiry threatened to undermine America's chances of beating the Russians to the moon. And the Russians were not waiting around.
By then, we had very good overhead photography from our satellites. And we had evidence that they had a lunar program.
The Soviets already had their moonship going through a long pre-launch countdown at their secret launch facility at Baikonur. It was called Soyuz, and it was scheduled for launch in just a few months. The Soviet Union, it seemed, was once again poised to humiliate America in space.
Turning Point, brought to you by Eagle and the new Eagle Talon, restyled from the ground up with an aggressive new look. Turning Point will continue in a moment.
Testing the new Eagle Talon TSI today is Sharon, a professional driving instructor. Ready? Let's go. Talon's all-wheel drive's great for this maneuver. Makes you real popular with road crews, too. Lots of power from the 16-valve turbo, 210 horses. Wouldn't you like to try some parallel parking? Sure. Nice technique. Hey. Really.
Test drive the Eagle Talon at your Jeep and Eagle dealer today.
Every day, lots of people choose FedEx to take their 2-day packages. Cost? About $8.
Every day, lots of people choose UPS to take their 2-day packages. Cost? About $6.
Every day, lots more people choose the U.S. Postal Service to take their Priority Mail 2- to 3-day packages. Cost? $3.
So, 8, 6, 3, what's your priority? Priority Mail from the U.S. Postal Service.
Your family,
You'd give your life for them, but that's not what they want. They just want you to stay healthy. But high cholesterol could put you at risk of a first heart attack, even if you have no signs of heart problems. And the fact is, about 1/3 don't survive their first heart attack. Call 1-800-PREVENT to find out about treatment plans that could help you cut your chances of a first heart attack and live a longer, healthier life. Call your doctor or 1-800-PREVENT now from Bristol Myers Squibb.
The Hoover Power Drive Cleaner is America's best cleaning upright, and it's self-propelled for cleaning so easy, even a brother can do it.
Hoover, nobody does it like you.
Just because I wear mascara here doesn't mean I have to wear it here.
Revlon Colors Day Lash Colors sets in seconds for all-day wear and won't smudge off.
Even when you do this, even when he does this.
Revlon Colors Day Lash Color won't smudge off.
Statistics show that 40% of all kids who smoke marijuana live in the city. Guess where the other 60% live?
She was an Olympic contender, an aspiring attorney, a politician's wife. How could a life so perfect feel so out of control?
She's bulimic? Why didn't you tell me?
Based on actual events in the life of Ellen Hart Pena.
I need help.
Wings Crystal Bernard stars in the world premiere movie Dying to be Perfect, ABC Sunday.
Ordinary household appliances. Something goes wrong. They can melt, even burst into flames. Hidden dangers you may not know about. You better watch this 2020. Plus, look at these beautiful children. This couple turned to science to get them. So why doesn't he want them now? A strange story of a family torn apart. 2020, Friday.
Race to the Moon, the tragedy of Apollo 1.
When we return, the race to the moon takes a surprising turn.
Suddenly, fate dealt the Russians a blow as hard to take as Apollo 1 was for the Americans.
I'd be sitting here lying to you if I said I wasn't glad. It's like a 500-mile race at Speedway. One of the cars spins out, and you're in second. It's nice.
Turning Point will continue after this from our ABC stations.
Grab the keys to a Mercury Sable and you won't let go. It's the roomiest Sable model ever, so there's a place for 5 or 6. Make space for whatever you like with this split-fold rear seat. And if you want even more room, choose a Mercury Sable wagon for the same low price. Mercury Sable, at your Mercury dealer now.
Imagine yourself in a Mercury now.
This is a KXLY News 4 update.
Good evening. An accident has claimed the life of a Washington water power worker. I'm Mark Wright.
And I'm Marianne Mishima. The snow keeps falling and utility workers continue their struggle. We'll have a live report on that accident and efforts to bring power back to your homes.
Also tonight, a standoff in West Spokane. Police negotiate with a man holed up in a West Spokane apartment. We'll tell you how it all ended.
And for those in need of a warm place to stay, there's room available at shelters. However, they're reaching out to you for help.
Total news coverage comes your way on News 4 right here at 11 o'clock. We hope to see you then.
Traffic and weather every 10 minutes. Live news and sports, Paul Harvey, business news and more. It's the KXLY Morning News, weekday mornings from 5 to 9 on News Talk 920.
So you guys have to feed the cows first thing in the morning?
Yeah, most of the time.
They get their breakfast, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you always get your breakfast in the morning?
Not always.
Would you ever have breakfast for lunch or for dinner, maybe?
That sounds good. Fine.
What about pancakes for dinner?
Like IHOP's gourmet pancake breakfast for $2.99. You get harvest grain and nut or pumpkin pancakes or country griddled cakes plus eggs, bacon, and hash browns for just $2.99.
Breakfast is a pretty important meal, don't you think?
As my mom says it, breakfast feeds the brain.
It might be smart to have it for lunch or dinner.
Yeah. Get all A's.
Turning Point, Race to the Moon, the tragedy of Apollo 1 continues. Once again, Peter Jennings.
3 months after the Apollo 1 fire, the U.S. space program was on hold, and there was great anxiety that the Russians were going to win it after all. At the Soviet Space Center, they were about to launch a spacecraft that was designed to reach the moon. It was called Soyuz 1, and like America's Apollo 1, it carried its nation's hopes for the first lunar visit.
Its pilot was the veteran cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov, shown here in training for his flight, who took it into Earth orbit without a hitch. But suddenly fate dealt the Russians a blow as hard to take as Apollo 1 was for the Americans. Soyuz 1 lost power in orbit, and on re-entry, Komarov's parachutes did not open properly. Soyuz 1 crashed to Earth at more than 400 miles an hour. Komarov's funeral was the first public sign that the Soviets were having trouble with their space program. In just 3 months, in the American-Soviet race to beat each other to the moon, 4 men were dead, and both space programs were back on the drawing boards.
I'd be sitting here lying to you if I said I wasn't glad. I'm sorry somebody got killed, but it's like a 500-mile race at Speedway. One of the cars spins out, and you're in second. It's nice.
So it leveled the playing field a bit.
Leveled the playing field.
And gave you another shot at victory. What the U.S. did not know at the time was that Soyuz 1 was not the only fatal mistake the Soviets had made in their secret rocket program. Before the Soyuz tragedy, a giant rocket had exploded during a test at the launch facility, killing more than 100 scientists, engineers, and technicians. It was the worst tragedy in any nation's rocket program. These classified films of Soviet technicians burning to death in a test gone wrong would be hidden by the Kremlin authorities until long after the Cold War was over. At about the same time as the Soyuz 1 tragedy, the Apollo Review Board released its report on the fire at Pad 34. It was inconclusive.
We knew, of course, that there'd been some source of ignition. We searched and searched, and we never did really find where it was.
Never found the source of the spark?
Not for certain. We found where we suspect it was, but we don't know for sure where it was.
The investigation report called for several changes, including a safer hatch. But all the other problems with the Apollo spacecraft would not have been critical if the capsule had not been pressurized with pure oxygen. And the space agency admitted in congressional hearings that it had made a fatal mistake by not providing a safer two-gas system for Apollo.
We advise the committee that we now have over 20,000 hours of experience in test time with a single gas system. However, as a result of this experience, we are analyzing again and reviewing again a two-gas system.
What NASA did not tell Congress and the American people was that the oxygen question had already been analyzed for them long before the Apollo 1 accident. North American Aviation, which built the Apollo spacecraft, had also built this, the X-15 rocket plane. And North American had learned through extensive testing not to use oxygen in cockpits. Although the test pilots breathed oxygen through their masks, their cockpits were filled with nitrogen. It is the nitrogen in our air that keeps oxygen from making everything around us go up in flames. North American had originally proposed a two-gas system for Apollo, much like the one the Russians used, mainly because of its experience with the X-15. And if anyone had bothered to look, the company even had film to show how a two-gas system could save lives. The test pilot walked away from this explosion and fire without a scratch, saved by what engineers called his island of safety, including nitrogen in the cockpit. Dr. Toby Friedman was North American's flight surgeon. He tried to persuade NASA to reconsider the use of pure oxygen in the Apollo spacecraft.
I took the position that the mere fact that they had gotten through a dangerous procedure did not justify doing it again in Apollo.
NASA had ended the discussion in 1962 by sending North American an order to drop its plans for a two-gas system. NASA directed North American to delete nitrogen system provisions and provide an atmosphere of pure oxygen in the Apollo spacecraft.
I still believed that it was not in the best interest of the mission or the safety of the astronauts. And I was so valuable in my dissent that, yeah, I was instructed that if I wanted to continue on the project, I had to go along with what had been decided.
NASA's orders did not quiet everyone. Hilliard Page was an engineer for the Apollo quality control contractor General Electric. 4 months before the fire, he wrote NASA a prophetic memo. In it, he warned of an oxygen-fed fire in the Apollo spacecraft and said that it should be considered now instead of by Monday morning quarterbacks.
We tested all the power plants and the rockets and the world net, but we never tested a fire starting in a capsule. And they looked at it from the standpoint of what is the chance that there'll be a spark. We were living with risk the whole time. And so this was a risk that we didn't realize it was as great as it was.
It took NASA 21 months and almost $500 million to rebuild the Apollo command module and get back into the space race. The new Apollo had better wiring, better plumbing, a safer hatch, and NASA had quietly designed and installed a new two-gas system of nitrogen and oxygen despite the extra weight. And there was now a more powerful booster rocket which could handle the additional load. Wally Schirra, as Gus Grissom's backup, was automatically in line to command the next manned flight, Apollo 7. Wally Schirra and his two fellow crew members, Walt Cunningham and Don Isley, would be the first astronauts to be sealed into a spacecraft on Pad 34 since the Apollo 1 fire.
We had done everything we could with that spacecraft. We'd lived with it. And I might add, I was known as Jolly Wally until that mission.
Everybody was looking at every detail, and Wally got actually the nickname of Grandma Schirra because the slightest discrepancy was brought up by Wally.
Now I'm serious. I lost a buddy who lived next door. I was executor for his estate. And I got quite serious about this mission. I wasn't going to play games.
Most people involved realized if we have a problem with Apollo 7, that the whole Apollo program may be canceled.
But in October of 1968, Apollo 7 blasted off in a picture-perfect launch. It had a flawless flight of almost 2 weeks in Earth orbit. But as successful as Apollo 7 was, it did not get an American to the moon. And everyone knew the Soviets were ready to launch a manned vehicle to loop the moon and return to Earth. If the Russians had got there first, you felt, much of the country felt, the whole imbalance between the two nations would have been different.
It was another Sputnik. Had the Russians gotten to the moon first, it would have been Sputnik all over again, because some people make a distinction between orbiting the moon and landing on the moon. Back in those days, 30 years ago, 25, 30 years ago, just getting to the moon was a big prize.
After the Apollo 1 fire, the last thing NASA could afford was another failure. The next flight, Apollo 8, was to be commanded by Frank Borman and was scheduled to test more procedures in Earth orbit. Once again, the pressure from the Russians made a difference in the space race and forced America's hand.
When I flew Apollo 8, I was called back and told that our mission had been changed in August to go around the moon in December because the CIA had determined that the Russians were going to try to go around the moon before the end of the year.
How far before the mission was it changed?
Well, it changed 4 months before the mission.
We were getting prepared to fly around the moon sometime in 1968. About 6 months earlier than Frank Borman did it. We knew about his flight. We could have done it earlier.
Cosmonaut Alexei Leonov was Frank Borman's Soviet counterpart. He says Soviet space officials were not willing to take the same gambles as the Americans were.
We lost that moon stage for purely administrative reasons.
As Soyuz sat on the ground because of Soviet indecision, Apollo 8 lifted off from Cape Canaveral.
This transmission is coming to you approximately halfway between the moon and the Earth.
December 1968, not quite 2 years after the fire on Pad 34, and Apollo 8 was headed for a Christmas Eve rendezvous with the moon. Most experts thought the Russians would get to the moon first, but Americans Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and Bill Anders became the first humans to see the backside of the moon, the first to travel to another world.
Without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep.
That meant more to me. I think when I look back, the emotions of Borman circling the moon and reading the chapter out of Genesis, I think was more emotional than Neil's first steps on the moon. Because Apollo 8 was such a giant step forward.
And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light.
On about the 8th or 9th revolution, we looked up and there was the Earth coming over the lunar horizon. It was beautiful, it was blue, and of course our thoughts then were directed back toward the Earth. You understand the loneliness that we share here as a civilization in this universe, and you also understand the beauty of what we have. It was a very poignant moment.
After Apollo 8's lunar trip, the Russians were effectively defeated in the race to the moon. But President Kennedy's pledge to put a man on the moon was still to be fulfilled. That would come next.
And from the crew of Apollo 8, we close with good night, good luck, a Merry Christmas, and God bless all of you on the good Earth.
Turning Point will continue in a moment.
Aren't there enough reasons in your life to talk to your doctor about Zocor? Call 1-800-MERC-75 for your free Zocor guide to healthy living. Zocor, be there.
Bring home the smiles during Sears Portrait Studios holiday sale. Our $14.95 package has plenty of portraits in the sizes you need most. 1 10x13, 3 8x10s, 4 5x7s, 4 3.5x5s, plus 40 wallets. You'll get a couple of presents too, like 10 holiday greeting cards free, and your choice from any of our backgrounds free. Get your best holiday portraits ever, only $14.95 during Sears Portrait Studios holiday sale. Hurry, final week.
I hope you don't mind. It's something to wear.
The StarTAC wearable cellular phone. There's no better way to stay connected. Motorola, what you never thought possible.
Over the last 150 years, all kinds of companies that said they'd be there when you needed them didn't stand up to their promises. That's life. Our policy of thoughtful, prudent investing has kept us, well, a pillar of strength for the last 150 years. That's New York Life, the company you keep.
Leo has a new boss.
I just feel this connection with Julia.
Who's interested in more than just work.
By the way, Leo, you're not bad looking.
So when temptation calls,
it happened in the moment.
Leo takes the risk.
You call this a job?
You won't believe how far it goes.
I can't do this with you unless you're 100%.
All new Relativity, ABC Saturday.
Someone's attacking Luann's students, and she's next.
Are you prepared to kill a child in order to save your own life?
Dangerous Minds, ABC Monday.
So what brings you to Eagle's Fastener Department?
Well, we're in the midst of a remodel of our home, and I have been looking all over town to find a screw that would fit these.
And so you came here to Eagle Hardware and found the
Right.
European metric cabinet screws.
Absolutely.
8,417 fasteners.
Eagle is in our home.
Eagle Hardware and Garden. More of everything.
Add a touch of quality craftsmanship with Bellwith Cabinet Hardware. Distinctive designs for any cabinet. Bellwith is quality you can count on at Eagle.
Turning Point, Race to the Moon, the tragedy of Apollo 1 continues. Once again, Peter Jennings.
Apollo 8 had won the race to the moon, and the Russians quietly folded their manned lunar program. But President Kennedy's goal of putting a man on the moon, not just around it by the end of the decade, had yet to be realized. And by the summer of 1969, the United States had only 5 months left. In July of 1969, Apollo 11 blasted off from Cape Canaveral. Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins were on board. This was the one that would do it.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
The whole world, it seemed, stopped to watch. The human race had finally gone where man had never gone before. It was called mankind's greatest adventure, technology's foremost achievement. But for those who were close to the first Apollo astronauts, it was much more personal.
These men contributed to the safety and the success of the other Apollo flights. And I think their legacy would be that they were the stepping stones, the foundation of the Apollo program.
The changes that were made all benefited the program. If we'd been smarter, we wouldn't have had to have such a tragedy. But I think the success of the program hinged on going through that horrible experience.
And when Neil Armstrong walked on the moon on Apollo 11, he really stood on the shoulders of Gus and Ed and Roger.
We'd like to dedicate the first steps of Apollo 17 to all those who made it possible.
Gene Cernan, commander of Apollo 17, was the last human on the moon.
I just dedicated Apollo 17 to all those who made it possible. And quite frankly, from my point of view, Apollo 1 and the Apollo 1 crew and the sacrifice they made it possible.
In 1975, an Apollo command module docked with a Soyuz capsule in Earth orbit, and the astronauts shook hands with the cosmonauts. The two symbols of the Cold War race to the moon, the American Apollo
and the Soviet Soyuz had become, finally, symbols of cooperation in space. There is a young woman who works at the Kennedy Space Center. Sometimes on her lunch hour, she comes out to Pad 34 to be close to her father. She was 8 years old when Lieutenant Commander Roger Chaffee, her father, was killed here almost 30 years ago.
This site is very moving for me. I feel really close to my father, even though this is where he died. At the funeral, I don't know that I really understood until probably a week or so later when I realized he just wasn't coming home anymore.
Although they buried Roger Chaffee in Arlington National Cemetery, this, in many ways, is his true monument. And Ed White's, and Gus Grissom's. And stenciled on what is left of Pad 34 are these three words: abandon in place. It means this is supposed to be left here forever as it is.
Coming up on News 4.
Tragedy in the Spokane Valley tonight. A Washington Water Power worker has been electrocuted.
A SWAT team surrounds a Spokane apartment in an attempt to disarm a gunman.
And the Red Cross shelters get a warm welcome.
With its sleek styling, easy outroller seats, plus air conditioning and 7-passenger seating, all for a great price. The Plymouth Voyager is pretty attractive.
It's true. Jersey sweats are all kinds of comfortable. They're built to last and they do not get fuzzballs. Anywhere. Come on. Jerseys. It's true.
Somewhere between cloud white and slate gray is a color called fog. One of the colors between the colors created by Canon Laser Color. Canon Laser Color. Its only competition is reality.
Turning Point continues. Once again, Peter Jennings.
There is a postscript to the Apollo story. 30 years ago, most of the astronauts and officials had the dream of eventually going not just to the moon, but on to Mars. Since the last walk on the moon by Gene Cernan, that dream has languished. But last August, scientists discovered the possibility that some form of life might exist on the red planet. And 2 weeks ago, the United States launched an orbital probe of Mars. We're reminded of how dangerous all this is. Last weekend, a Russian probe of Mars hardly left Earth when it failed and came crashing back again. Next month, another American spacecraft will be sent to land on Mars with a robotic rover. All this will eventually lead to a relatively inexpensive program of robots, but not people, exploring Mars. The dream of exploring the planets is so expensive now that it will likely remain a dream. But then, walking on the moon was once just a dream.
The next edition of Turning Point will be in 2 weeks' time. That's our report for this evening. Don't forget Nightline after your late local newscast, and 2020 tomorrow. Thank you for joining us. I'm Peter Jennings. Good night from the Kennedy Space Center.
To order a video cassette or transcript of Turning Point, Race to the Moon, The Tragedy of Apollo 1, call 1-800-913-3434. We welcome your comments and suggestions. Write to us in New York or email us at tpoint@abc.com. Turning Point is a presentation of ABC News. More Americans get their news from ABC News than from any other source.
This is KXLY TV, ABC4, Spokane, Coeur d'Alene.